Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling a case that, well, it really shook a lot of people globally. Back in 2018, the Watts family murders in Frederick, Colorado.
It absolutely did.
And I think for many, it just exists as this awful single point of tragedy. But our mission today is to kind of go beyond that surface horror. We want to pull back the layers, look at the sources, really extract the timeline of what happened, the deceit involved.
Yeah, the evidence trail.
Exactly, the evidence, the chilling specifics, and also get into the legal and psychological context that the sources provide. We're trying to understand how this unfolded for the investigators themselves.
Right, moving from that initial missing persons report to, well, the horrifying reality of family annihilation.
And we should probably set the gravity right up front. This isn't an easy topic.
No, absolutely not. This is a deep dive into the crimes Christopher Lee Watts committed. He was 33 at the time. He murdered his wife, Shanann, who was 34, and critically, 15 weeks pregnant with their son, Nico.
And their two little girls.
And their two daughters, Bella, who was 4, and Celeste, just 3 years old. This all happened on August 13th, 2018. And as we look through the records, the thing that just jumps out again and again is this stark contrast, isn't it?
Between the image and the reality.
Precisely. The seemingly perfect family image they projected, especially online, versus the horrific truth playing out behind closed doors. Understanding how that facade crumbled, I think, is really central to understanding the motive here.
Okay, let's start there then. Before diving right into the crime itself, maybe we should set the scene a bit more. What was going on beneath that surface? What pressures were building?
Well, the sources paint a picture of a family really chasing that American dream ideal, or at least projecting it very strongly.
Like,
Christopher and Shannon got married in North Carolina back in 2012. Then by 2013, they'd moved out to Frederick, Colorado, and bought this big 5-bedroom house.
which sounds pretty successful on the surface.
It does. Watts had a job with Anadarko Petroleum. And Shanann, she was very active, very visible, using social media a lot for her work. She was selling Thrive products for Lavelle.
That multi-level marketing company.
Exactly. And that MLM aspect, it's actually pretty significant here, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I think so, because it offered her flexibility, working from home, which is great. But those kinds of businesses often demand this constant projection of, well, perfection, success, happiness, prosperity.
That's the brand.
Right. And yet, the sources are really clear. The financial picture behind the scenes was anything but perfect. They bought that big house in 2013. But just 2 years later, in 2015, they filed for bankruptcy.
And that's a major tension point right there. You have this pressure, maybe self-imposed, maybe from the MLM structure, to keep up appearances, the happy family, the nice house, the thriving business.
All those Facebook posts.
All those posts, constantly broadcasting success. But underneath, there's this significant financial strain from that 2015 bankruptcy. You have to wonder how that debt, and maybe the feeling of, failing to live up to that public image, how that might have fueled resentment. Maybe made Watts feel trapped in a life he desperately wanted out of.
It sounds like a pressure cooker situation, really.
It does.
So, okay, let's fast forward to that critical weekend in August 2018. Shanann was returning from a business trip, right?
Yeah, she'd been in Arizona for a Lavelle event. She got back very early Monday morning, August 13th. Her friend and colleague, Nicole Utoft Atkinson, dropped her off at home around 1448 a.m.
And Watts had been home with the girls, Bella and Celeste, over that weekend.
Correct. And the alarm gets raised surprisingly quickly. It's Atkinson, Shanann's friend, who really kicks off the investigation.
How so?
Later that same day, Monday, she realized Shanann wasn't answering texts. Now, for someone like Shanann, whose business relied so heavily on constant communication, that was apparently very out of character. And then, crucially, Shanann missed 2 really important appointments that day. First, a scheduled OBGYN appointment for her pregnancy.
Wow, okay. Big red flag.
Huge. And second, she missed a mandatory business meeting for Lavelle. So Atkinson knew something was seriously wrong.
So what did she do?
She did exactly what you'd hope a concerned friend would do. Around 12:10 p.m., she actually went over to the Watts house. Nobody answered the door. So she called Chris Watts, who claimed he was at work. And then, thankfully, she contacted the Frederick Police Department.
Right, which brings us to that initial police response, the welfare check. That happened pretty quickly then, around 1:40 p.m. the same day.
Yes. And this is where the narrative of, oh, they just left, immediately starts to, crumble.
Yeah, Watts let them search the house, didn't he?
He did, which in hindsight is just baffling. He gave police permission to enter and search. You have to wonder, was he trying to bluff? Did he think he could actually talk his way through this? Or was it just panic?
Maybe a bit of both. But his initial story was
What?
that he hadn't seen them since he left for work.
Yeah, his claim was he saw Shanann around 5:15 a.m. before he left for his shift to Anadarko, and that was it. But the officers inside the house, they immediately found things that just didn't square with that at all.
What kind of things?
Well, okay, the family dog was there, safe and sound, but everything Shanann or the kids would need to actually leave voluntarily was still in the house.
Like her purse, keys.
Exactly. Shanann's purse was found. Inside it were her keys, her wallet, and some necessary medication she apparently took. Her car was still parked in the garage.
And importantly,
Critically, yes, the girl's car seats were still inside her car. You don't take two toddlers anywhere without car seats.
no way.
And her phone, her lifeline for her business, and everything else. It was found stuffed down between the couch cushions.
Like maybe hidden or just dropped in the struggle?
It's hard to say definitively from the sources, but its location certainly wasn't normal. And then there was perhaps the most symbolic item.
The wedding ring.
Shanann's wedding ring. It wasn't on her finger, obviously, because she wasn't there. It was found placed deliberately on the bedside table in their bedroom.
Wow. Okay, so if you're an investigator walking into that scene,
You immediately know this isn't a simple she packed up and left scenario. A pregnant mother doesn't leave her car, her keys, her phone, her meds, the kids' car seats, and crucially, take off her wedding ring and leave it behind just to, disappear voluntarily with two small children?
no, doesn't add up at all.
Not remotely. The scene screamed foul play almost instantly. It made Watt's initial story about leaving for work while they were fine completely unbelievable. He was the prime suspect from pretty much the moment they walked in that door, regardless of how calm he might have appeared.
So that initial claim, it was just a lie to buy time, basically.
A calculated attempt to create distance and misdirect? Absolutely.
And yet, he somehow managed to keep up that calm facade, didn't he? Even transitioning into this public role of the worried husband.
Oh, remarkably so. It's actually quite chilling to go back and watch the news reports from those first couple of days.
He gave interviews, right? Outside the house.
He did, spoke to local Denver stations, KMGH TV, KUSA TV, stood right there on his front lawn, pleading, begging for his wife and daughters to come home safely.
And the really disturbing part.
Is that while he's doing this, giving this performance of the distraught husband, you can sometimes actually hear the police investigators and their search dogs working on the property right behind him in the news footage.
The sheer audacity of that.
It's profound. The public plea for their return versus the facts that the police already suspected and that he obviously knew. It's a stark contrast.
So the investigation ramped up very quickly then.
Oh, exponentially. Because, as we said, the police weren't really treating it as just a missing persons case anymore. They suspected homicide. So the FBI got involved, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, the CBI. They joined the search the very next day, August 14th.
The pressure must have been immense on Watts.
Huge. And it led to, really, the first major turning point in cracking the case wide open. On August 15th, just 2 days after they disappeared, Watts agreed to take a polygraph test.
And?
He failed. Reportedly, he failed it quite spectacularly.
Okay, so the polygraph failure, that was the catalyst.
That was the moment his story completely imploded. Once he knew, the investigators knew he was lying, things changed rapidly. He first apparently broke down and confessed something to his father, Ronnie, who was there with him.
Right.
And then he spoke to the authorities. But, and this is critical, this first confession, let's call it confession one, it wasn't the full truth. Not even close.
What did he claim in this version?
It was a very specific, almost meticulously crafted false narrative. It was designed, it seems, entirely to lessen his own blame and shift the worst of it onto Shanann.
Ow.
He admitted, okay, yes, he killed Shanann. He admitted he strangled her. But he claimed he only did it in a sudden fit of rage after he discovered that she had smothered their daughters first.
He blamed her for the girls' deaths.
Directly. He painted this picture where he supposedly came home, found 4-year-old Bella already dead, and then allegedly saw Shanann in the process of actively strangling 3-year-old Celeste on the baby monitor. He claimed seeing that horrific scene made him snap and attack Shanann.
Wow. That's quite a story.
It is, and you can see the self-serving purpose, right? It positions him not as the cold-blooded killer of his entire family, but as a sort of tragically provoked victim himself, someone pushed into violence by his wife's monstrous actions.
Trying to mitigate the consequences?
Absolutely. And as part of this partial false confession, he did reveal where the bodies were. He told them they were at an oil field site owned by Anadarko, his employer.
Which led to his firing.
Immediately. He was fired by Anadarko that same day, August 15th.
So he gives them the location, but under this false premise.
Right. It's like he's cooperating just enough to make his provoked victim story seem more credible, perhaps thinking the victims couldn't contradict him. The authorities, obviously, acted on that information immediately. They went to the oil site on August 16th and, tragically, found Shanann, Bella, and Celeste.
But his story, this confession one, it actually held for a while, didn't it? It created some doubt, some speculation about Shanann.
It did, unfortunately. It muddied the waters publicly for a period, but the definitive thing that just shattered that narrative completely came later, on November 29th. That's when the authorities released crucial surveillance footage.
Neighbor's camera.
Exactly. That neighbor, their decision to check, save, and share that footage with police was absolutely pivotal. It proved Watts was lying about the entire sequence of events.
What did the footage show?
It was captured very early on the morning of August 13th in the pre-dawn hours. It showed Chris Watts, clear as day, first loading a red gas can into the back of his work pickup truck. And then, crucially, it showed him carefully backing that large pickup truck right up into his garage.
Why was backing into the garage so significant?
Because investigators deduced, and it seems obvious now, that he was doing that to load the bodies into the truck out of sight for transport to the disposal site.
Right. And the timing destroyed his original alibi.
Completely. It proves Shanann never left the house alive with the girls that morning, as he'd initially claimed when he said he left for work at 5:15 a.m. The video showed him actively preparing for the disposal after the time he claimed to have last seen them alive. It confirmed this wasn't a spontaneous event, but a calculated cover-up.
That footage must have been damning.
Utterly. It essentially forced his hand. Faced with that undeniable visual evidence, his confession one just disintegrated. Months later, while in custody, he finally provided concession 2.
The full admission.
The full, devastating admission that, yes, he had murdered Bella and Celeste too. The whole progression is just remarkable in its deceit. From the public pleas to the self-serving lie blaming Shanann to being cornered by video evidence and then finally admitting he killed everyone, it just underscores the level of calculation involved.
Not just in the murders, but in managing the story afterwards.
Exactly. Premeditation in the act and premeditation in the cover-up.
Okay, so when we talk about the crime itself, the disposal, the details are incredibly disturbing, but they also tell us a lot about his state of mind, don't they?
They absolutely do. The level of effort the choices made, they speak volumes about the coldness and premeditation involved.
The bodies were found at that Anadarko oil storage site, his workplace. How far was that from their home?
Sources say it was about 14 kilometers, which is roughly 8.7 miles. Not incredibly far, but remote enough and familiar territory for him.
In choosing his workplace, that feels significant.
It's inherently premeditated, wouldn't you agree? He picked a place he knew well, a secure industrial site. He likely believed his access, plus the nature of the site, would guarantee the bodies were never found, or at least not easily linked back to him.
Right. It completely undermines any idea that this was just a sudden, unplanned fit of rage. You don't drive almost 9 miles to a specific industrial location in a fit of rage.
Precisely. And the way he disposed of them, it varied.
Shanann was buried, right?
Yes. Shanann was found in a shallow grave dug near the oil tanks at the facility. But the way he disposed of the children, Bella and Celeste, it's almost unthinkable.
They were found inside the oil tanks themselves.
In separate, large, crude oil storage tanks. And the logistics of how they got in there are just horrifying to contemplate.
How did he do it?
According to the investigation and later confessions, he pushed their small bodies through an access hatch located at the very top of these enormous tanks.
How big was the hatch?
The sources are specific on this, and it's chilling. The circular opening, the hatch lid, was only 8 inches. That's about 20 centimeters in diameter.
8 inches for a 3- and 4-year-old child.
Yes. Think about that. Forcing their bodies through an opening that small? It wouldn't have been quick or easy. It requires significant, brutal, sustained physical effort, and then dropping them into thick, toxic crude oil.
Was there forensic evidence of that struggle, of forcing them through?
Tragically, yes. The medical examiner's report noted specific injuries consistent with this horrific act. Bella, the older daughter, had distinct scratches on her left buttock. Investigators concluded these were caused by her being scraped against the rough edge of that small metal hatch as she was being forcefully shoved through.
Oh, my God.
And investigators also found a tuft of blonde hair, presumably belonging to one of the girls, actually snagged on the rim of one of the hatches. Physical evidence of the violence of the disposal itself.
So the disposal wasn't just an afterthought, it was another violent act.
Absolutely. It reinforces that cold-blooded, sustained effort. It wasn't just about hiding them. It was about obliteration, almost. It completely contradicts any notion of a momentary lapse in control. We also know from his final confessions that he smothered the girls. He used his bare hands.
And putting them in the crude oil, was that just about hiding them or something more?
It likely served a dual purpose. Hiding them, yes, but crude oil is also incredibly dense and corrosive. He probably hoped or intended for the oil to degrade the bodies significantly, maybe destroy evidence, perhaps make it impossible to determine the exact time or even cause of death.
Which presented challenges for the investigators, I imagine.
Massive forensic challenges, the fact that they were able to recover the bodies at all, and that the medical examiner could still identify not just the cause of death, but also those specific injuries from the disposal. It really speaks to the thoroughness of the investigation needed to counteract Watts' lies.
So the different methods burying Shanann, using the tanks for the girls, does that suggest anything?
It demonstrates a kind of twisted, systematic approach, a calculated effort to erase his entire family unit from the physical world, using the specific environment of his workplace to do it.
So with the bodies found, the timeline falling apart for Watts, the legal process must have moved pretty fast.
It did. He was formally charged on August 21st, 2018, just over a week after the murders. And the charges really reflected the full scope of the horror, especially the deliberate nature of it.
What were the specific charges?
3 counts of first-degree murder. Importantly, 2 of those counts were specifically for the murder of a child under 12 by someone in a position of trust, reflecting Bella and Celeste's vulnerability.
Okay.
Then 3 counts of tampering with a deceased human body, 1 for Shanann's burial, 2 for the girls being put in the tanks, and then there was 1 other very significant charge.
For the unborn child.
Yes, 1 count of unlawful termination of a pregnancy, recognizing their unborn son Nico as a separate victim under Colorado law.
That charge feels particularly important, legally and morally.
It absolutely is. It affirmed Nico's life as having been unlawfully ended, and it also, especially when you consider the later confessions, reinforced the premeditated aspect. He wasn't just killing his wife, he was knowingly ending that pregnancy too.
And it all led to a plea deal, eventually.
Yes. The charges were incredibly serious. Watts pleaded guilty to all counts on November 6, 2018. This was part of a plea agreement.
What was the key part of that deal?
The prosecution agreed to take the death penalty off the table. Capital punishment was still legal in Colorado then, though it was abolished later in 2020.
And that was at the request of Shanann's family.
That's what the sources state. Shanann's parents, Frank and Sandra Rizik, specifically requested he be spared the death penalty. They reportedly said they didn't want any more deaths and couldn't face the potential decades of appeals that a death sentence would entail.
Understandable. So what was the sentence?
Sentencing happened on November 19th, 2018. He received the maximum possible under the plea deal. 5 life sentences without the possibility of parole.
5. How does that break down?
3 of the life sentences were for the first-degree murders, served consecutively, meaning one after the other. The other 2 life sentences were served concurrently at the same time.
And the other charges?
The judge added significant extra time for those. He got 48 years for the unlawful termination of pregnancy and another 36 years total for the 3 counts of tampering with the deceased body. So that's an additional 84 years on top of the multiple life sentences.
Essentially ensuring he will never leave prison.
Never. And his time in Colorado's prison system was very short. Just a couple of weeks after sentencing, on December 3rd, 2018, he was moved out of state.
Why?
The official reason given was security concerns. He was transferred to Dodge Correctional Institution, which is a maximum security prison in Waupun, Wisconsin, and that's where he remains.
Okay, so that covers the legal outcome. But let's circle back to the biggest question. The motive. It shifted several times, didn't it?
Radically shifted. We already talked about Confession 1, the blatant lie blaming Shanann. Then, later, 3 later, a slightly different version emerged.
What was that one?
This version tried to soften it a bit, maybe make it seem less monstrous. The lawyer claimed the murder of Shanann happened after an argument they were having about divorce. In this telling, Bella supposedly walked in on them arguing, or right after Shanann was killed. Watts allegedly told her Shanann was just sick. Then, according to this version, he loaded Shanann's body and the still alive girls into the truck
And killed the girls later.
and smothered them one by one later at the oil field site. Still horrific, but it retains that element of it escalated from an argument, trying to downplay the cold-blooded planning.
Still sounds pretty self-serving.
Extremely. But I think the most revealing and damning information about his actual motivation and planning came much, much later, long after he was sentenced.
How'd that come out?
It emerged in June 2021 through communications Watts apparently had with a pen pal, someone he was writing to from prison. And these details, if true, they just completely obliterate any notion that this was spontaneous or impulsive.
What did he reveal?
He reportedly confessed to this pen pal that he had been actively planning the murders for several weeks before August 13th.
Weeks.
Yes. And he admitted something truly chilling. He said he had been giving Shanann OxyContin.
Why?
He allegedly told the pen pal he was hoping the drug would cause her to miscarry, to terminate the pregnancy.
To get rid of Nico.
Exactly. His twisted calculation, apparently, was that if the baby was gone, it would somehow make it easier for him to leave Shanann and start a new life with his girlfriend, Nicole Kessinger, whom he'd been having an affair with.
So the motive wasn't just about divorce. It was about eliminating all obstacles to his new relationship.
That's what this later confession strongly suggests. It transforms the crime from a sudden domestic dispute into a calculated weeks-long plot involving attempted poisoning, all aimed at methodically removing his entire family so he could be free.
That changes everything.
It really does. And there was one more horrifying detail revealed in those pen pal letters.
What was that?
He admitted that he had actually tried and failed to smother both Bella and Celeste in their beds at home before he put them in the truck.
He tried to kill them in their own beds first.
That's what he reportedly claimed. He tried, it didn't work, or he stopped. Then he loaded them into the truck, possibly still alive, maybe drugged, it's unclear, along with Shanann's body, drove them almost 9 miles away, and then finished the murders at the remote oil field.
That sequence, it just removes any shred of doubt about premeditation, doesn't it?
None whatsoever. It confirms the murderers weren't a single act committed under stress in the truck or at the site. It was a planned sequence, with repeated attempts on their lives, starting in their own home, in their own beds. It completely dismantles any credibility left in his spontaneous rage or argument gone wrong defenses.
This case is often cited now as an example of feminicide, right? Family annihilation.
Yes, it fits that pattern, where the perpetrator, usually the father, feels trapped or like a failure and decides to eliminate the entire family unit, often as a perceived, albeit twisted, solution to their problems or a way to start over.
But there's something unusual about Watts in that context.
There is. Former FBI profiler Candace DeLong has pointed this out. She noted that Watts' case is actually quite rare because typically family annihilators usually commit suicide after the murders.
But Watts didn't.
No. He claimed later he contemplated suicide out of guilt, but he obviously prioritized his own survival. That refusal to follow the typical familicide script, perhaps, reinforces the narcissism and self-preservation that seem to drive all his actions, from the affair to the alleged OxyContin plot, to the murders, the disposal, and the elaborate lies afterwards.
And the timing. You mentioned August. Is that significant?
It's a disturbing pattern noted in some analyses of familicide cases referenced in the sources. A number of these horrific crimes seem to happen in late summer, particularly August. One theory is that it might be, consciously or subconsciously, timed to occur before the school year starts, potentially delaying discovery and buying the perpetrator more time to escape or establish an alibi.
Yeah. Chilling. Given the nature of this case, the seemingly perfect family, the horrific reality, the social media presence, it's no surprise it just absolutely exploded in the media.
Oh, completely. It became a global true crime obsession almost overnight, partly fueled, ironically, by the vast amount of digital footprint Shanann herself had created through her MLM work.
Right, all those videos and posts.
Exactly. So the initial media coverage was intense and immediate. Shanann's parents gave a very raw, emotional interview fairly early on ABC News' 2020 in December 2018.
And there were TV specials pretty quickly, too.
Yes, HLN aired one called Family Massacre, Chris Watts Exposed. That was significant because it included some of the police body camera footage from the initial welfare check, and crucially, that neighbor's surveillance footage that broke Watts' alibi.
And they interviewed people who knew him.
They did. That special also featured parts of an interview with his girlfriend, Nicole Kessinger, where she talked about changes she'd noticed in his behavior leading up to the murders. That really fed into the narrative about his motive being tied to starting this new life.
The talk shows jumped on it too, I imagine.
Absolutely. It became a fixture on shows trying to dissect the why. Dr. Phil had episodes featuring various analysts, as people like Nancy Grace, Candace DeLong, trying to unpack his psychology, the secret life, the potential triggers.
Right.
And interestingly, the Dr. Oz show actually had the neighbor whose camera captured that key footage. It really highlighted how ordinary citizens can sometimes play an absolutely critical role in solving major cases.
Then came the dramatic adaptations, which always seems to happen with these high-profile cases.
Inevitably. Oxygen Network released a documentary episode about it for their Criminal Confessions series in late 2019. And then just a month later, in January 2020, Lifetime aired its own movie.
Chris Watts, Confessions of a Killer.
That's the one. A docudrama, basically dramatizing the events based on the known facts and his confessions at that time.
But that film caused some controversy, didn't it, with Shanann's family?
It did, and this is a really important point about the impact of true crime media. Shanann's family spoke out very publicly and very strongly against the Lifetime movie.
What were their objections?
They made it clear they were never consulted about it, they weren't involved in its production in any way, and they certainly weren't making any money from it. But their biggest concern, they said, was the fear that this dramatization would just stir everything up again and likely increase the online harassment and speculation they were already suffering from.
That issue of secondary trauma for victims' families from these adaptations is huge.
It's massive. When a horrific, real-life tragedy is turned into entertainment, especially without the consent or involvement of the surviving family, it can force them to relive the absolute worst moments of their lives over and over again, often fueling unwanted attention and conspiracy theories online. It's a difficult ethical line.
Yeah, it really is. And then Netflix weighed in.
Yes, in September 2020, Netflix released its own documentary, American Murder: The Family Next Door. And that one took a somewhat different approach.
How's-
It relied very heavily on archival material. It used a lot of the Watts family's own home videos, Shanann's actual social media posts, which were extensive text messages exchanged between Chris and Shanann, police interrogation footage, body cam video.
So it used their own words and images to tell the story.
Largely, yes. That use of Shanann's own voice, her own videos chronicling their life, juxtaposed with the police footage and the text messages revealing the breakdown. It gave that documentary a particularly intimate and, frankly, heartbreaking quality. It allowed the victims, in a way, to narrate the life that was stolen, making that contrast between the projected happiness and the grim reality even more potent for the
So wrapping this up, we've gone through the sources. We've traced this case from Watts' initial, almost unbelievable public performance of grief.
right through to the final chilling confessions about weeks of pre-planning.
We have a much clearer picture now of those underlying pressures, the financial stress, the strain of maintaining that perfect image. We've seen the key evidence that broke his story, especially that neighbor's video and the failed polygraph.
And we've had to confront those horrific details of the disposal, forcing his own children through that tiny 8-inch hatch into crude oil miles from home. It speaks volumes about the calculated erasure he attempted.
Yeah. The tragedy here, it just operates on so many levels, doesn't it?
It really does. You have this almost textbook example of a public facade just completely collapsing under scrutiny. You see the perpetrator's systematic, calculated efforts to control the narrative, shifting his story multiple times to try and mitigate the consequences.
From blaming Shanann to admitting the pre-planning with OxyContin.
Exactly. And then there's the ongoing impact. How the story continues to be consumed, adapted, and discussed, which keeps Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and Nico in the public eye, but often, as we discussed, at a really painful cost to their surviving family members who have to endure that scrutiny.
Which leads us to a final thought, something for you, our listeners, to consider. Chris Watts presented multiple, wildly different versions of the truth. He went from the immediate lie, blaming Shanann,
A story seemingly designed purely for self-preservation in that moment.
to the later, detailed confession admitting he planned it for weeks, tried to induce a miscarriage with drugs, even failed in his first attempt to kill the girls in their beds. So the question is, what does this constant layering of deceit tell you about how truth functions in these high-profile criminal cases? How many different versions of a motive, all self-serving, all potentially manipulative, can actually exist and be presented by one person trying to shape the outcome?